Ouch.
Sorry, don't know five right now.
You haven't heard, yeah.
Hi, Marcy Spoliar. I'm going to bring this information session on Robert's Rules, the rules to regulate, and the Freedom of Information Act to order. We'll just start with a quick Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have our town attorney, Phil Pierce, here to provide us with some information on all those topics, and then he'll open it up to questions.
Thank you. Are you going by Madam Moderator? What do you,
That's fine, yes.
Yeah. We'll talk about titles.
We're just looking at the Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi. So I'm the town attorney, Phil Pierce. I know a lot of you from my time on the RTM. So congratulations on your election or re-election. It's a great board to be on. And I think, I got a lot out of it serving and enjoyed it. So this, we're going to start with the Connecticut Freedom of Information Act. This is a small group, so if there are questions, let's take them as they come. Feel free to raise your hand and I'll call on you and repeat the question. So the way to think about this, we've got kind of three different bodies of rules that govern the RTM in particular. We've got the Freedom of Information Act, Robert's Rules, which are parliamentary procedure rules, and then the rules to regulate. So FOIA is kind of like the baseline. Those are set in stone, cannot be changed. You cannot be less restrictive than what FOIA will allow. We can be more restrictive. And an example of that we'll get to is sending out agendas 5 days in advance, which is what the RTM requires, versus 24 hours in advance, which is what FOIA requires. And then kind of like the last one in the chain is the rules, Robert's Rules, which kind of is the default rule on procedure for meetings if there's not a more stringent rule that's been applied in some other way. So the format I did for freedom of information is kind of like question and answer. So FOIA applies to committees and subcommittees. So it applies not just to the RTM, but if you form a subcommittee, it applies to that subcommittee. And then related to that, a meeting is a quorum of any body to discuss or act upon a matter over which it has authority. So if you form a subcommittee and you then have a quorum meeting to discuss things, that is going to be a FOIA meeting. So you need to notice it. Yeah, Drew.
Quorum.
Representative Georgiadis.
Thank you. Quorum varies, or it's always more than two?
Quorum, so it's going to depend on the size of the body. So it's like 50% plus one, rounded. So for the RTM, you guys are 40. So 21 is a quorum. For your standing and special committees, the 8, right? So you'd have 5 to be a quorum. For SLMC, you need 3 because it's a 5-member body. So depends on how large you constitute the committee. So the smaller the committee, the less people it takes to form a quorum. An exception to this that we'll get to is political caucuses. So you can have caucuses of the committee. and that is not a meeting under FOIA. So if the Democrats on SLMC want to get together and talk, and there's 3 of them, that's not a meeting. But if they involve a third person, another fourth person, an additional person in the meeting, that then becomes a meeting.
And you'll talk about text messages and that later?
Yes. Yes. So question on text messages. So text messages, meetings can take any form. So an email chain, a text message group, a phone call, all of those things, if a quorum of the members of the body, whatever it is, whether it be a committee, subcommittee, RTM, are having deliberative conversations about items that are within their jurisdiction, that is a meeting under FOIA, and it has to be noticed. And because you can't notice, phone calls really, or emails for public participation, that is a violation of FOIA. So, yes.
And so if your RTM district is 4 people, is there a quorum? And you're talking about things that happen at the meeting? Is your quorum, because we got FOIA'd, because there were 3 of us on a text message discussing an RTM meeting.
Well, so 3 RTM members from one district, you're saying?
That's not a quorum.
No, it's not. No, so it's not. So a political caucus communication is exempt from disclosure under FOIA. Whether something is a meeting, it does not mean it's disclosable under FOIA. So there are notice requirements for meetings. Separate from that, there are, public records that public officials or elected representatives can create and maintain that are disclosable under FOIA, and most things are records. It can be handwritten, video recorded, any manner of recording constitutes a public record. So if it's 3 members of a district, I mean, I would think that is disclosable under FOIA, but
We had to disclose.
yeah, that doesn't surprise me, because the districts aren't really subcommittees of the RTM. If you were a subcommittee of the RTM, then I suppose that the 3 of you discussing something could be a political caucus, but just 3 members talking about something is not a political caucus.
So you can be FOIA'd if you're over 2 people?
It's not 1 or 2. One, I mean, you can take handwritten notes, and that can be FOIA'd.
Okay.
So it doesn't have to. The number of the question was, if it's 2 people, does that mean you can be FOIA'd? It doesn't matter how many people touch the communication. What matters is, if I'm a public official and I take handwritten notes, that could be a public record that is disclosable under FOIA. What matters is, what is the document? And unless it's a political caucus communication, then, or otherwise an exempt document under FOIA, it's going to be disclosable. Separate from all of that, there are notice requirements for meetings.
Yep.
So meetings must be noticed. We cannot conduct business as public officials outside of noticed meetings. So the question when there are communications over email is, are we conducting business? And generally what the commission will look at is whether it's deliberative. So things like scheduling a meeting, setting an agenda, requesting and receiving information, as long as you don't cross over, and it gets a little gray at times, but as long as you cross into deliberative discussions where you are debating and advocating for positions on an item, that sort of thing is not necessarily, is not going to be a meeting. Yeah, Representative Zezima.
Thank you. Thanks for doing this, Phil. On the notes, is that only notes taken during a meeting, or is it notes that may pertain to any RTM business at any other time?
It's any notes that pertain to RTM business, I think, are going to be public records. There's no exemption for notes. So the question was, is it any notes? Is it notes only taken in a meeting, or is it any notes that could be a public record? I think probably it's any. I mean, it depends on what the document is, but if you're an RTM member and you're writing notes about the RTM, then to me that's a public record. So sometimes it's not always clear. I mean, the commission, if you read commission opinions, they kind of sometimes go in opposite directions. But we're faced with the act that we have, which the purpose of the act is to shine a light and have public disclosure of things. So keep that in mind as you do things and go about your business. What What is a meeting? A meeting is any gathering, hearing, or communication of, by, or to a quorum of members to discuss any act, discuss or act on any matter over which they have authority. What is not a meeting? So we talked about political caucuses. It doesn't matter if it's in person or over email. A political caucus is not a meeting. If you involve a additional person outside the caucus in the communication or the meeting, that is no longer a political caucus. So there's a number of FOIC opinions about caucuses. They actually go every which way, but as a general rule, or as an absolute rule, I would say don't involve any person outside a political caucus in your communications or meetings if you want the caucus communication to be kept confidential.
Bill?
Yeah, Representative Horton.
For the RTM, can you clarify like what our caucus, like who is, obviously those people who are on RTM, but who else is part of our caucus? Like you're part of our caucus, correct?
So the RTM members are the 40 elected members. This is somewhere in here. Hold on a second. I think I gave out my copy of that. So you've got the members of the Board of Finance. This is in here somewhere.
Do they have to be,
This is on page 6.
they have to be ex officio RTM?
Well, they're members of the RTM, regardless of whether they're ex officio. So you've got the 40 elected members that are full members, voting members. You then have certain categories of people that are ex officio. They hold RTM status by virtue of the office. So they can join political caucuses. Those are the members of the Board of Selectmen, members of the Board of Finance, the chair of the Board of Education, the town attorney and any assistant town attorneys, and the town clerk. And that's spelled out in the charter that those members are ex officio. So if the town attorney is a Democrat, the town attorney can caucus with the Democrats. Same thing with the members of the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, chair of the Board of Ed, et cetera.
But if they're not, how does that affect the number? That we're doing the quorum?
They don't count towards a voting.
Well, it's not a meeting. So a caucus is not a meeting. So you don't need to have a quorum to do anything in the caucus, to have a discussion in caucus. We spoke about phone and electronic communications, but those are going to constitute a meeting if the members are engaged in deliberative discussion over something that they have jurisdiction over. All meetings are public. So again, the only business that can be done is business in public. The agenda for, under FOIA, you've got to publish an agenda with the town clerk 24 hours in advance. RTM is more restrictive than that. We have 3 types of meetings. We have regular meetings. These are what bodies set in their annual organizational meeting for the forthcoming year. Special meetings, which are going to be specially scheduled meetings. And then there are emergency meetings. You will probably never need to call an emergency meeting. Emergency meetings are very strict under FOIA. It's like a building's on fire and we need to do something to make sure the building's not on fire anymore. I mean, it's extreme situations, true emergencies. For regular meetings, under our rules to regulate, I believe you've got 5 days notice to go out you can add new business to the agenda with a 2/3 vote, but under rule to regulate 33 and cross-referencing, I have another section in this on rules to regulate, but it makes sense to cross-reference it here. The only business that the RTM can actually take up and add to the agenda in the same meeting are honorary resolutions or matters that were held in committee. So if you want to add something to the agenda in a meeting, it takes 2/3. And then if it's not an honorary resolution or not something that was held in committee, it has to sit on the agenda for 1 month. So, typically you would just wait and put it on the agenda the right way the next month. Minutes of regular meetings must be available within 7 days, but you have to submit written records within 48 hours under FOIA. So written records of votes. So when I was on the RTM, the way I always encouraged people to do this when I was moderator was submit your minutes within 48 hours. That way you satisfy the vote requirement, and then you also don't have to worry about separately submitting the minutes. So that's kind of quick, but when you're doing committee minutes, if you follow a template, and I think that there's a template that the body uses, you can basically do them in the meeting and submit them the next day to Betsy. Special meetings, these are meetings that are not listed on the regular meeting schedule. Today's meeting is a special meeting. The notice must be posted 24 hours in advance. No new business can be added to the agenda during the meeting, so you're limited to strictly what's on the agenda. This is for RTM and subcommittees this is for any public body. You can't add stuff to an agenda in a special meeting. That can't be waived in any way. And then the same thing, records of the votes have to be posted within 48 hours. And the minutes are 7 business days for special meetings. So again, if you have to submit the votes, just submit the minutes. It's basically the same thing. Emergency meetings can be called without notice. You'll never have to call an emergency meeting. If the moderator thinks she needs to call an emergency meeting, probably she'll talk to me or to the town clerk and we'll figure it out. But hopefully that never has to happen. So there's a section here about the content for the minutes. This is to satisfy FOIA and also is consistent with Robert's rules. You don't have to have a lot of substance in your minutes. Some people like to do more, but really you need to identify where the meeting occurred, when it began, when it adjourned, who was present, the motions that were acted upon, points of order and appeals, and then that's basically it. You don't have to do anything more than that. FOIA does not give the public a right to participate in meetings. It gives them the right to attend the meeting, but not necessarily participate. For the RTM and the committees, the rules aren't actually, the rules were not as clear as I thought they were on this, but I think it's pretty clear that public comment is expected on all items. The practice at RTM meetings is the body discusses, then it goes to the public for public comment, then it comes back to the body for additional comment if there was public comment. For the nature and extent of public comment generally is going to be in the discretion of the chair. So if there is a ton of people, the moderator might limit comment, or the chair, if it's a committee meeting, might limit comment to 3 minutes or 90 seconds or whatever, some reasonable restriction. So there are some sections here in the outline on executive sessions. Yes, Dave.
The moderator, can that restriction of time also include frequency? So if a particular member not only drones on, but keeps getting back up and keeps talking, can the moderator limit his time?
So this is just addressing members of the public. Members of the public typically would get up once and speak.
That part,
For
yeah.
members of the body, I don't think we have a specific rule. Well, actually, we do have a rule on it. I think it's limited to 10 minutes and you can get up and address the item twice, but you can't say the same thing twice. So if somebody's not going to get up a third time unless for some strange reason that's waived. The time limit, I've seen the moderator be flexible with that, past moderators be flexible with that, depending on the situation. But, typically you would expect, each person, they get up to speak for no more than 10 minutes and then they can't get up, they can only get up twice.
So is the getting up twice, that's actual rule? Because I don't think
It's in there.
it is.
It's
But do
so
we-
it's the default rule in Robert's rules, and I think it is in the rules to regulate.
It's twice per item.
Right.
So even if there's an amendment.
That's twice per
Twice on the amendment.
Right. So the question was, is it twice per item? So it's twice per voting item. So if there's a motion and then an amendment, you can get up twice on the amendment and twice on the motion because they're two separate voting items. Yes, Madam Moderator.
Just clarify, is it 10 minutes each time they come up or 10 minutes total? And does that 10 minutes include if they're seeking information from somebody on the, like someone else? Does that include the information being responded to?
So It's a good question. When you read Robert's rules, it kind of suggests that it's 10 minutes per item, not per time you get up.
That's what I thought.
But I think the practice at the RTM has been you can get up to 20 minutes. But I think that that's like, that's probably too much. Like 10 minutes should be enough.
Yeah.
So, but you know, the moderator can interpret that. And, you know, if somebody doesn't like the moderators, we'll get to this in Robert's rules, but if somebody doesn't like the decision of the moderator, the procedure is point of order, state your point of order. Moderator decides whether what's happening is in order or out of order. If you still don't like it, you appeal to the body, and then the body votes on whether or not the moderators got it correct.
So you'd say point of order, representative has
I think
overextended.
you'd say point of order, the moderator's limiting comment from the member in a way that's inconsistent with our rules. The rule says X and the moderator's doing Y. And the moderator is probably going to agree with the moderator. And then your recourse is to appeal to the body. And the body would just have to decide whether they agree with the moderator or not. And it takes a majority of the body to reverse the moderator's simple majority. Yeah.
Examples that this has happened or?
Oh, the mansplain, this is the
That's-
mansplain rule.
It has happened. I actually didn't appeal myself. I didn't win it, but it was tied. I think it was like 1919. So it does happen. It's pretty rare. But I mean, most people, when they call point of order, they just accept what the moderator said. But just keep in mind, you don't have to do that. You can appeal it to the body. Sorry, Marcy. But that's how the process works. I'm going to skip over executive sessions because it's very rare that the RTM would ever have to enter into an executive session because of what you handle as a body. What is a public record? So public record or public file is any recorded data or information relating to the conduct of the public's business, prepared, owned, used, received, or retained by a public agency. This is the definition from the law. So their public records are public records, regardless of whether they're handwritten, typed, tape recorded, printed, photographed, or reported in some other way. There are categories of exemptions under FOIA. Some are related to personnel records, some are related to other things. I don't think I did that, but if you receive a request for records under FOI, for the people that have been on the receiving end of one, did you work with the town attorney or staff to respond? Staff? Okay. So what I would say is if you receive one, you should forward it to me as the town attorney and to the human resources paralegal. That's probably who you worked with to respond. No?
There was
I worked with
IT
Peter
guy.
Ritchie and
Peter
that
Ritchie.
that was.
Yeah, he's in,
before-
right. So he's in.
Before they
human
had
resources.
paralegal.
I worked with Patrick Egan, who was
Okay.
Yeah.
IT. And then now there's a new rule from the previous administration that you have to pay for FOIA.
So
Is it?
yeah, that's not uncommon. Most towns will require you to pay depending on the circumstances, but it's the statute deals with when people have to pay and when they don't have to pay. So it's
So if we don't
permissible
wanna
to do
pay the
that.
Town, does that mean that us that can't charge or then don't have to do the FOIA?
The circumstances under which you can charge is very limited. So it's not a significant fee. So often it's not worth the time for the town to charge people money because it might be $5 to collect and you're going to spend time trying to collect the $5. It's usually easier just to give people the records, but it depends. Representative Zezima.
Thanks. So just so everybody understands, who would this request be coming from or which individuals could be?
Any member of the public, anyone can submit a FOIA request. It could be somebody who's elected. It could be somebody who's unelected. It could be anybody.
They send it to the town and then the town notifies us.
Well, they send it to the records custodian is who they're supposed to send it to. For the RTM, I mean, you guys don't really have a records custodian, so I'm not sure who they would send it to. They could send it to you directly, in which case you should notify me and our paralegal and human resources because we help. That's the person who mans the laboring oar and responding to FOIA requests typically. But typically, you're supposed to serve it on the records custodian. We have a centralized FOIA system, so it would typically go to that department, and then they would reach out to other departments to collect
And
things.
is there anything in the rules that would compel you to literally turn over your phone or your computer, or is it just providing the information in good faith?
I don't think that FOIA requires officials to turn over their phone to the town or the requester. It does require them to make a diligent search of their own personal records. It doesn't matter if you're using your own cell phone or your own computer or your own email address, just to be clear. It's if you're doing town business on it, it's still disclosable under FOIA. So they can't require you to turn it over, but if you don't do a complete search and the person's dissatisfied with your search, they can appeal to the commission, and then the state commission has a hearing on whether there's been compliance. So any questions on FOIA before we move on to Robert's rules? Okay. All right. So page 5 of the
Yes, can I ask a question? So,
yes.
not to beat a dead horse, but just to make sure I understand. If any one of us is sitting at home at night on our laptop, just typing up notes about any matter of business about the Penfield Pavilion, that's a public record.
I think that is a public record.
So what's the advice? Because if it's a public record, if somebody's gonna, if it would come out in public, you would obviously want it to sound, neutral.
I think it depends on what it is that you're writing up. I mean, if you're writing up something for RTM business, it's a public record. I mean, sometimes it can be gray because if you also live in town and you're interested on Penfield. But if you're writing up something for an RTM meeting and Penfield's on the agenda, I mean, that's, I think, going to be a public record because you're doing that in connection with your work as a public official. Rob, did you have something?
Isn't draft kind of in that gray area? Draft emails or draft memos are sort of separate from FOIA.
Yeah, so drafts are a category of exemption. But just because something's a draft doesn't mean that it's automatically exempt. It has to be a draft where the need for public disclosure is outweighed by the need to keep it a draft. So there's even on that one, there's still a balancing act that would need to be done. But
So you should label everything as a draft and then write it out.
I'm not, no, I think you just be mindful that documents that you can create may or may not be disclosable under FOIA. So just, the point of this act is not to make you do work or try to, think of ways that documents aren't disclosable. It's just to have things be transparent. So just, I think I would go about how you normally go about things, but just keep in mind that documents you create could end up in the public domain. Yes.
Relating to RTM business though. So
Yes.
if I'm concerned about what's recyclable at the town dump
Correct.
and it's not something that we're adjusting as an RTM and I come up with a list, that's not.
Right. But if you're working on an ordinance about recycling and you
And
have
that's
notes on it, yeah, that's going to be a public record. So
And then just one more follow-up question. If we happen to go to a meeting that's sponsored by, or if we go to a outing or a function that's sponsored by someone, like if we all show up at McKinley School for their World Fair and we're all just happen to be there, is that's
Okay.
not,
it's not a meeting. So chance social, I skipped over this in the outline, but chance social gatherings
just wanted-
are not meetings. That's correct. So if you all are at the grocery store at
Yeah.
the same time, that's not a meeting. You're not violating FOIA. If you then decide to all sit down and talk about RTM business, you are violating FOIA. Yeah, Steve.
So
Department.
I'm kind of old school. I don't bring a computer. I don't bring a cell phone to meetings. I do sometimes like doodle, take down notes during committee meetings when speaker. Do I have to save those things?
So that's a good question. If something's been requested of you, you can't destroy it. If
I've already
you just in
destroyed
your
it.
normal course just don't keep your RTM notes,
Right.
then I think that's fine. I mean, the commission has a number of opinions where things were just kind of in the ordinary course, documents have been destroyed, and as long as it's not being done intentionally to avoid, public record disclosure, I don't believe that there's a law that applies to the RTM that would mandate you to preserve all documents. For some agencies, there is. But I think in the normal course, if you don't save your notes after a meeting, I
Normal
think that's
course.
okay. Yeah. But if you ever get served with a request, I mean, you can't destroy anything at that point. You have to provide what's been created. Yes.
We should be identifying ourselves. Sharon Pistilli,
Yes.
District 5.
That's
We
all
should be
right.
identifying ourselves when we speak because it's a meeting.
Okay. Oh, that was the comment. Yes. So that was a question from
Representative
Representative
Barrett,
Barrett about,
District 7.
yes.
Old school.
Representative Zezima.
Thank you. Liz Esma, District 4. So one more FOIA question. There's always been a rule within the individual caucuses of the RTM about replying all to an email. Can you just cover that quickly for a moment?
Yeah, so that is, so I think you're referring to the head of the caucus will send out an email to everyone, and then most people are blind copied,
Yeah.
right? So that there's not a risk of a reply all. So there's nothing improper about that caucus talking over email about things. I think that the reason people have historically avoided mass communication over email is probably for two reasons. One is that, I mean, once the email's out there, you don't know where it ends up. And then the second thing is that sometimes people might forget that they're not supposed to include people that are outside the caucus, and they might reply all and copy somebody else. So you obviously don't want to do that. The other situation where this comes up is where, you know, as members of the RTM, someone from the community emails the RTM with a question or an advocacy piece, right? You'll get during budget time, sometimes you get, you know, a couple hundred emails in busy years. So there's a risk there that somebody replies all, and now you're having potentially a deliberative discussion over email about something. So you want to be careful not to reply all to emails if the RTM is on it. And well, there's nothing improper about the caucus having discussions over emails, or a caucus having discussions over emails. It's probably a good idea not to do a lot of that, because a third party could be inadvertently included, and then you now have, if you have a quorum, you now have an improper meeting. Any other questions on FOIA before we go on? Okay. All right, so Robert's rules are kind of the baseline parliamentary procedure rules that apply to help a meeting conduct business. So keep the meeting focused. You deal with one item at a time. You talk about one thing at a time. One person talks at a time. You vote on one thing at a time. Keep things moving forward in a linear fashion. The other main thing about Robert's rules is that you focus on talking about the item that's before the body, not the person. Things are supposed to be very neutral. You know, you're supposed to actually refer to people by their title, not by their name. So that's why you always see Representative so-and-so as opposed to, you know, person's first name in RTM meetings. Members must obtain the floor by being recognized by the chair. If you don't have the floor, you can't speak. The chair decides who speaks and when. And most of the rules deal with which motions are allowed at a given time. There's actually a very small number of motions you have to worry about. There's a number of motions that I put in the outline that I don't think I've ever seen. You'll probably never see them. They just don't come up. And the larger the group is, the more important it is to adhere to the rules. So for the RTM being a 40-person body, it's pretty formal, and that's a good thing, because if it wasn't, it would be chaos and you guys wouldn't be able to get anything done. When you're meeting like when LNA meets, you know, an 8-member body, you don't have to be quite as formal. The chair should still conduct the meeting, but it doesn't have to be quite as formal. It's important when you're running a meeting, whether you're the moderator or the chair of the committee, it is important that the chair remain impartial. In a large body like the RTM, the chair should not be discussing the merits of a question. If the chair does that, or intends to do that, the chair should step away from the mic and let the deputy moderator take over, or the vice chair, depending on if it's a committee. In a committee, it may not be, it may not be practical to have like an 8-person committee to have the chair step aside. So I think the better practice is the chair kind of lets other people talk before the chair talks. But there's, Robert's rules are relatively flexible when it comes to dealing with smaller bodies. So it's kind of up to the chair on those. But yeah, Representative Georgiadis.
The term chair here, is that interchangeable with moderator or we
The
just,
moderator is the chair of the RTM.
and then when you break down into your meetings, there's.
Yeah,
also
I mean,
chair.
yeah, right. These keep in mind, these rules apply to any body that's doing business. So it applies to the RTM as a whole. It applies to your committees, your subcommittees, special committees. The chair should not interrupt the speaker as long as the speaker is not violating any rules. That can be hard at times, especially in small committees where they're less formal, but the chair, as long as the person's not violating rules, should let the person speak. But the chair has to ensure that the speaker's comments always remain germane to the motion that's before the meeting.
Can I ask on that? That seems to be where we struggle a little bit Drew Georgiadis, District 9. When someone gets recognized by the moderator or the chair and begin to speak, when you say it must remain germane to the subject, sometimes people just tell a story and it's not germane, it's not a question that pertains to what we're discussing. That's where I get confused.
Yeah, so
as
it's,
to what is
so the question is,
the rules.
right, the question is within the rules, when can the chair cut somebody off because they're not making comments?
When can you call point of order?
What, right, so when can you call point of order because someone is making comments that are not germane to the motion that's before the meeting? So it's a tough question. I mean, it depends on the circumstances. So sometimes people are not always linear thinkers also, and they may have like a big buildup to something that relates to where they're what's before the body, right? They may have a big buildup. So I think it's not easy. Now, if there's something totally unrelated, like you're talking about funding for,
The marina, and they start talking about a boat they had.
yeah, or they start talking about, Penfield or something that's not related about how, I don't know, or about the clubhouse that was redone a few years ago. If it's not somehow tied to what's before the body, then that's point of order. If they're just, going on about something that's not related to what is being voted on. I mean, the logic is, does this comment help advance the agenda, or is this just wasting time? So is it deliberative in a way that helps the body advance the agenda? Is it what we're talking about now, or is it not related to it? The comment doesn't have to be like helpful in meaning insightful, but is it actually, are we deliberating on this issue, or is it now, have we now gone beyond it?
And a follow-up, does that same rules apply to, obviously applies to members. Does it apply to the public? And does it apply to ex officio members that stand up, perhaps?
Well,
Or ex officio considered public?
Well, so the question is, one question was, are ex officio members considered public? No, they're members of the
So
meeting.
you can call point of order.
Yes. As to members of the public, I mean,
You only have 2 minutes, right?
well, usually 2 or 3, but I think if someone from the public got up and was talking about something completely off topic, I think it would really be up to the moderator to rein that person in, or the chair if it's a subcommittee or a committee. But typically with the public, unless it's really out of line, you would just let them go because we want the public to participate, and if that's how they want to use their 3 minutes, it's going to be limited. So
I was just asking because there was an instance where a member called point of order on the public. How do you protect that person in the public
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, the members of the public aren't members of the meeting, so I don't think that it's appropriate to call a point of order on a member of the public.
No, I agree with
Yeah.
that. I was just wondering how to protect them and
Protect
keep
the,
them talking.
protect the public? Well, I mean, it would be up to the chair of the meeting to say that the point of order is not well taken and let the person from the public continue their comment until they've completed it or exhausted their time. So, yes, Representative Horton.
Yeah, it was actually Representative McCabe's question, which I think you answered, but I want to make sure. For can members of the body call a point of order or just the moderator, which I know you've talked about, but I want to make sure that if she's.
Yes, so members of the body can call a point of order. So yes, I mean, the moderator determines points of order, but the members can absolutely call points of order. The chair cannot close debate as long as the member has not exhausted the member's right to debate. So, we said it before, it's, you can get up twice and you have 10 minutes. I think Robert's rules is probably 10 minutes per person. I think RTM practice and our rules might be 10 minutes per time you get up, but that's up to the moderator to decide. All right, so let's see. Members can address each other directly. So if there's a question for somebody on the body that's unusual, you always go through the chair. You always go through the moderator. If you have a question for town staff, if you have a question for anybody, I mean, you always address your comments to the chair, to the moderator, and ask questions through the moderator. After a motion's made, before it's voted on, it's typically good form to restate the motion before the vote is held. Once the motion is put to a vote, there's no further debate. And then the chair should announce the results of the vote. Talked about the RTM quorum, and this is on page 6. Go on to motions. So motions are proposals for the members to act in a certain way or adopt something or approve something. So to make a motion, you obtain the floor, you wait to be recognized by the chair. After someone has finished speaking, you get up to the microphone, identify who you are, articulate your motion concisely and clearly. It's good to start. I move that, or I make a motion that, and then your motion. And then you have to wait for someone to second it. If no one seconds it, it's dead. If someone seconds it, now the meeting owns the motion and it's up for debate and subsidiary motions. Representative Horton.
Just reading the online questions. Representative Kuhn asked, Rule 22 states unanimous approval of each committee required to get items onto consent calendar. Is that right? Unanimous?
Yes. So, so for RTM actionable items, so the way your process works, you have committees that meet and then vote on the week before the RTM meetings, right? Your committees meet, receive information, presentations, and then meet in committee and vote on the items. If all 5 standing committees are unanimous, separately unanimous,
And I think he's
Then-
trying to speak on the.
You can speak on there. I mean,
well, so I don't know if he has a question on there, but if all committees
Can
are
you hear me?
unanimous, then it goes on the consent calendar on the RTM. It's a separate line item on the agenda. And basically, we've had that happen over the years, right? You can have all of those items that are bundled on the consent calendar acted upon in a single motion. But if a member wants to remove something from the consent calendar, anyone can basically do that. Now, for a long time, the consent calendar didn't happen because people didn't get their minutes in time. So you couldn't put things on the consent calendar. So that's even more incentive to get your minutes in quickly so that things that are unobjectionable can just go on the consent calendar and can just be approved. Makes business move a little bit more quickly. Okay, so types of motions. So there are main motions, those introduce an item for consideration. There's one main motion on the floor at a time. And then there are subsidiary motions. These get decided before your main motion. So the main one that's going to come up is the motion to amend. So that will happen pretty frequently, which is a motion to change the motion that's before the body. So that needs a second. it's debatable, you can amend it one time. So you can have a secondary amendment. There's some motions that are not susceptible to being, or some amendments that are not susceptible to being, amended a second time. Like if you had a main motion, the example I gave is you have a main motion, and then this amendment is to strike one word. You can't now have a secondary amendment to the amendment. You can't have an amendment to that amendment because, well, unless you're going to, no, you can't. There's no way to do it. So, but most of the time you can have a secondary amendment. It's a majority vote. If the amendment passes, then you go back to the main item and you continue debate on the main item as amended. If it fails, then you return to your original motion and somebody can put forward a new motion to amend if they choose to do that. Friendly amendments, I have a thing in here on that. That's frequently misunderstood, but it's not up to the movement to accept the friendly amendment. That's good form, but then it's really up to the body, because once a motion has been made and seconded, it's owned by the body, not by the movement anymore. So it can be adopted by the meeting if the moderator should say, is there any objection to the friendly amendment? And seeing none, okay, the friendly amendment's adopted and we'll move to this amended motion. But if one person objects to that, the reason that you do it is if one person objects to that, now it's not, it's not by consensus. You've got to have discussion on it. Or actually what you would have is you need to put it forward as a formal motion and then see if there's a second for it. Call the question. This comes up pretty frequently on the RTM. It ends debate by the RTM. You still have public comment. So rules to regulate 34 says the motion is not in order until after public comment, which makes sense because you'd have public comment and then more RTM discussion. It's a 2/3 majority. So often people will put forward this motion and then it fails and wasted, 3 minutes on a roll call vote. So sometimes it's not helpful to advance things. It's counterproductive, but that'll come up. Refer to committee.
Drew George House, District 9. Can you give me an example of the call to question? Like you would just say, Mr. Moderator, I would like to call the question.
Yeah, I move that we call the question.
And the question is.
The question is the item that you're voting on. So you have a motion to fund a new school, and the debate's going on a very, very long time. It's within the rules for debate, right? No one's exhausted. No one has gone beyond what the rules set for debate, but it's taking a very long time. And you've already had public comment. Someone says, I move that we call the question. And then if that motion's in order at that time and 2/3 are in favor, then you go right to a vote. But you've got to do a vote on calling the question and then a vote on the vote. So sometimes it's helpful to advance things. Sometimes it's not, because 2/3 is sometimes challenging to get on the RTM. And sometimes people who are even maybe in agreement with you on how they'll vote on the underlying item want to have the debate run its course, right? So
Phil, Chris Carroll, District 8. So using my earlier language, if people are droning on, somebody can call the question.
yes, but it's, I would not, I would not do that often.
Just don't.
No, but you can't, that's not a motion that you can interrupt someone with.
Right.
So you have to wait for there not to be.
No, but if 10 people just want to get up and just talk, you're beyond an hour and a half.
Yes, it's happened, and I've seen it be effective on the RTM to end the debate. Also seen it we waste 5 minutes on a motion to call the question that fails, and now we're back to the debate.
Yeah, understood.
So sometimes it's counterproductive, but it depends on the situation and how the debate's going. Postpone to an indefinite time. That's a motion that proposes that a motion be postponed until a date certain. Needs to identify when you're going to have it postponed till. Postpone indefinitely is kind of a soft way to kill a motion. It means that you wouldn't take it up again for the rest of the session. So it's a soft no on the main motion. Lay on the table sets aside a motion during the meeting, but you have to take it up before the end of the next meeting. So it's a little bit of a trap. Sometimes you do that at the beginning of the meeting to try to take something out of order, and you'll take it back up later on in the meeting. And take from the table is the other side of that coin. That's where you bring a motion back that was on the table. There are incidental motions. These are usually dealing with process or procedure. There's point of order. These point out procedural errors and request that the moderator enforce the rules. So you can interrupt other business. You can basically do that at any time if there's actually a rule violation. There's no second. There's no debate. You just state your point of order clearly and succinctly, and then the moderator says, the point's well taken, the point's not well taken. There's no vote. It's just the moderator. Appeal, which we talked about earlier. This is an appeal of the decision of the moderator to the full body, the RTM or your committee. And that interrupts other business, needs it, that I believe does need a second. And most often an appeal is debatable. You can't amend it and requires a majority vote. Suspend the rules. This does happen from time to time in the RTM. So sometimes in the rules to regulate, you'll see rules suspended. Ones that you'd commonly see are the one on the cutoff of how late we can take up items of business, which hopefully we won't have to ever suspend, but I think my first budget vote, we had to suspend it. And then the other one is political caucuses. You're allowed, I think, one political caucus under the rules to regulate. So sometimes that's suspended during meetings. I mean, by agreement of both parties to suspend the limitations on political caucuses so that the parties can call as many political caucuses as they want during the meeting. So that motion, it requires a 2/3 majority. And we talked about how FOIA is like the baseline, so you can never suspend FOIA. So you can suspend the rules to regulate, but you can't do it in a way that would cause you to violate FOIA.
Sorry to interrupt you. It looks like there's a comment online as well from Representative McDermott.
What? Hold on, let's see.
It's in the chat.
Yeah.
Yes, Mark
Is he
McDermott.
not?
Mr.
There he is. Yep, he's, you want to ask it, Mark?
Yeah, I just had a comment. I
Can
still
we?
think,
Yeah, they should be,
Representative-
maybe not.
Mark, can you type it? We can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, we can hear you now.
Now we can hear you.
You hear me?
It's on my computer.
Okay, I think there's still some confusion. I want to make a comment about the consent calendar, and Attorney Pierce is 100% correct about the timeliness of the meeting minutes. So those of you who are secretaries of the committee meeting minutes, you need to get them in, quite quickly after the committee meeting on our Monday night. So definitely try to get them in by Wednesday. But the other thing, it's each committee needs to have a quorum, and there needs to be a unanimous vote from each committee. So if 4 out of the 5 committees do not have a quorum, then that item, and they're all unanimous in those 4 committees, there's one committee that didn't have a quorum, so their votes don't count. So it's not going to go on the consent calendar. So it's important that everybody attends the committee meetings so we can get all of this on the consent calendar and limit the time we spend in the meetings, which I think most people like.
Attendance is.
It's a good comment. Another thing to keep in mind in your committee is that if you want, even if you're in favor of something, if you want it to be discussed before the full RTM for any reason, you think it's an important item, you want to get up and talk about it because it relates to your neighborhood, whatever, keep in mind that you may want to abstain or not vote in favor of it in the committee so that it gets before the RTM full body, so it doesn't appear on the consent calendar. Just the other side of the coin. That's rare that somebody does that, but I've seen people, I've never done that, but I've seen people do that, and that's the reason that they did it in committee. Division of the question. Some motions are easily dividable. You can separate it into 2 motions and then gets divided into 2 motions. Motion to reconsider. I don't think I've ever seen that one come up, but that's where a member on the winning side of a motion in the same meeting asks that the meeting reconsider. Did it come up last year? Okay, so there you go. So you have to be on the winning side and want to reconsider the vote. Needs a second. It's debatable if the original motion was debatable. Can't amend it. It's a majority vote. Motion to rescind. Similar, but a little more complicated. Actually, motion to rescind, I wrote the movement must be on the winning side of the vote. That's actually not correct. Needs a second. You don't have to be on the original side of the winning side of the vote. And what threshold of vote is required depends on the issue in the prior motion. And then voting methods. Most things that are uncontroversial will probably be conducted by a voice vote where the moderator says, all those in favor say aye, and then the ayes. The roll call vote is at the discretion of the moderator, or 1/3 of the members present can request it. Typically, it makes more sense to do a roll call vote if you've got more than a few people that are going to vote no, so you can count things up more easily. General consent is just where the moderator says, "Is there any objection to adjourning the meeting?" No, we're adjourned. Or kind of like the friendly amendment thing. Is there any objection to the friendly amendment being accepted? No. Okay, it's deemed accepted. And then threshold here on required votes. Now, abstaining is on abstaining. That's typically a refusal to vote. So for most items that you're voting on, that's going to count as a no vote because you're counted to the quorum of the body that's voting on the item. It's not the same as recusal. If for some reason you think if you recuse yourself, you should not abstain because you're still counting to the vote total and you're actually voting no in most instances, you should recuse yourself and then leave the room for the debate and the vote, not just the vote. And that's on Robert's rules. And then I have a list here of what I consider significant rules to regulate. Don't know that it makes sense to go through them all, but some of the ones that I think, even among the significant ones, are significant are how ordinances work. I mean, oh yes, Representative Zezima.
Excuse me, thank you. Liz Zezima, District 4. On the recusal, can a member request, probably through the moderator, that another member recuse themselves if they are not?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
No, I don't think you can do that. I think it's up to each member to decide that. And then whether it's proper or not, I mean, we have our standards of conduct in the charter, and it may or may not run afoul of that. People recuse themselves for all different reasons and sometimes have a higher level of discomfort over something than the standards of conduct might require. So I think I don't think you can force the issue of somebody refusing themselves. Let's see. Rule 32. So ordinances go to LNA, and then it also allows the moderator to send them to any other special committee for discussion or standing committee. And then it holds over for 2 meetings. You all have probably seen that at this point, or you will shortly if you're a new member. Rule 26 is on political caucuses, 10-minute recesses. And that's, as I mentioned, frequently suspended in budget times and other times. Rule 33 is the rule on adding things to the agenda in an RTM meeting. So you can add honorary resolutions and matters previously held in committee. Matters previously held in committee is going to be extremely rare. So typically you're looking at kind of sense of the body, honorary resolutions. Rule 36 is the one that relates to timing. And then Rule 39 is the rule that relates to advisory resolutions. So anything that is something that you're not exercising one of your powers as the legislative body or a power under the charter is going to be a sense of the meeting. So you want to, condemn the invasion of Ukraine. That's not something that our team gets to vote on. So you could do it, but it's an advisory resolution. It's non-binding. It's the sense of the meeting, and it would require 2/3 majority to pass, just as an example. So those do come up from time to time. It's up to the body to decide if they want to take the time to deal with those things when they are not part of the body's jurisdiction to actually like act on something. Yes, Representative Georgiadis.
Georgia, District 9. So a sense of the body resolution is different from an advisory sense resolution?
I think it's, the terms are used differently. I kind of consider them to be the same thing.
A sense of the meeting versus sense of the body?
Well, so actually, Rule 39 says an advisory resolution is defined as a sense of the meeting resolution. So they're defined, they use different terms, but it's defined the same way. They mean the same thing in the rules. Any questions on that? That's all I was going to cover. So do you got any other questions on anything? Yeah, Madam Moderator.
Do the committees that are formed by SLMC have to be equal in parties, even if we're in a situation where we're just because I know it's hard to form. If we have to have them equal, any committee we form has to have equal members. Unfortunately, one caucus might run out of members and that serve, and they'll be overtaxed in their efforts.
All right, so the only committee that you're required to have be even is the redistricting committee, because that's under the charter.
Okay.
So Rule 11 deals with this on standing committees and additional, I think it probably applies to additional committees. Membership of each committee shall, as closely as practical, reflect the proportional representation of the minority and majority meeting as a whole.
So proportional.
Actually, no, that's on standing. 12 is special committees. So it's 2 members of the minority party and 3 members of the majority. So unless you're
That is
doing,
the case, so, okay, that's what I was thinking, because it's just difficult, I know now, to form committees if.
oh, no, I'm sorry, that was, that what I just read dealt with the composition of SLMC. So I don't think there's anything that defines the composition of special committees. So I think, unless I'm missing it, in the absence of that, I would say that unless it's the redistricting committee, which has to be even under the charter, that you're probably going to follow what's set forth in 11, which says it's proportional to the representation of the parties on the body. You could,
I mean, obviously, we want representation from all bodies, all caucuses, but if they're, I don't want to, if there's 4 extra committees, then we've taxed them all.
just seeing if there's another rule on special committees. I don't think that there is. I think it's just Rule 12 is what gives the RTM the power to appoint special committees. So,
So, thank you.
any other questions? Yes, Representative Rock?
Chris Carroll District.
Oh, sorry.
Representative Carroll.
You're the two new guys. I'm sorry about that. Representative Carroll.
He's the famous
He's a new guy too.
Jonathan's the new guy. Well, I know Jonathan, so.
This might require a historical perspective, but speaking of committees, so one meeting down, everybody goes in and everybody listens to the same thing, and everybody votes on the same thing, but they have different titles. It's not really a committee process at all. And my understanding is it wasn't this way, it changed to this. And I guess I am asking for your perspective. Does it make any sense?
So, I think it does make sense. So the issue you had before was it was very taxing for town staff because they have to show up at 5 different places, 5 different days, maybe, to present to 5 different committees. At times, depending on what the subject matter was, because you could have it go one of 2 ways. Like you'd have, let's say you'd have I don't know, you have a school project that's going to go to finance because it's bonding, and it's going to go to ed and rec because it's a school. So they've got to present to those 2 committees. So they've got to go to 2 different meetings, and then it goes to the full RTM, and you've got 60% of the body has never heard anything about this, and they have to vote on it that night. So that's maybe not a great process. So that's one issue. And then sometimes you would have matters that would get referred to all 5 standing committees, in which case you've got to have town staff show up at 5 different places to hear things. So that's how it was a very long time ago. I think it was Jeff Steele when he was moderator, I think made a very positive change, which was to make it consolidated to 2 nights. So now everything was only happening on 2 nights. But what you saw there was that you had different discussion on the 2 different nights. And sometimes on the second night, which was on a Wednesday, you would get, maybe more comments or questions that couldn't be answered before the Monday. So this kind of evolved into things being on Monday night for committee and then the following Monday for the body. I think it was a lot smoother. So it does mean that your committees have less specialized things that are within their jurisdiction, but you guys vote on everything anyway. So I think that's about it. So I didn't have anything else. The only other thing I would just say is that you're all volunteers. Keep in mind that everyone who does this is doing it because they like the town. And even though it may not seem like it at time, everyone, I think, has the best interest of the town at heart. So try to keep that in mind and have that perspective as you work with everybody that you're going to run across. And happy to take any questions in the future. If you have any questions, please go through the moderator. You also have, I think, several other moderators on the RTM who probably have a pretty good familiarity with Robert's rules. You've got certainly Mark, you've got Representative Wackerman, and Jeff Steele was moderator for quite some time. So got some pretty seasoned people on Robert's rules as well. So, all right, thank you. I'll let Marcy go.
Thank you, Attorney Pierce. I don't know if I need a motion to adjourn. Can I just have one just in case? Representative Georgiana, seconded by Representative Zezima. We're adjourned.